Welcome to the Motivated Martial Arts Podcast. Your hosts, Jackson White and Gavin Cook, have been friends and Taekwondo training partners for over 40 years. This podcast will bring you a mixture of their life stories, martial arts, and business experiences to motivate you in life and throughout your martial arts journey. Adding in a mixture of inspiring interviews and some of the best traditional martial artists around today. So over to your hosts, the Motivated Martial Artists.
Welcome to the Motivated Martial Artists Podcast with me, Gavin Cook.
And me, Jackson White.
And today we've got Matt Stait in with us. Now, Matt is an instructor, a bodyguard, an author, a martial arts school owner, a public speaker, and he's also just venturing into the world of social media marketing, in particular stuff with TicTok. So that'd be quite interesting to hear about. So I'd like to welcome you on the show today, Matt.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for inviting me.
No, it's great to have you on. It's been a bit of a struggle to get hold of you, but we got there in the end, and we've got all of our technical stuff working, I believe. So hopefully it should go straight forward. So I'm going to pass you over to Jackson, who's going to fire off with the first question, Matt.
Great, yep.
Okay then, Matt. Hey, pleasure to meet you. Thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it. So something we ask What's something we ask all of our guests? We just want to get a bit of an insight into your early years, a bit of your background, and really how you got into martial arts.
Well, that's my story is, I suppose, not unlike a lot of others in some ways. With regards to, I was bullied as a child. I went through quite a difficult childhood that involved a lot of violence in the home. It involved, quite a lot of unpleasant stuff. But I was also bullied sort of remorselessly as a child in school because we moved around a lot. I was always the new kid, and being slightly ginger with some freckles and tall and gangly and socially awkward, it didn't really help my cause. So I suffered a fair bit with that. But then I would have my sort of little insular world that I would hide away from the world, and that would involve sort of Marvel comics and things like Spider-Man and Tarzan and wrestling, and I saw a lot of martial arts with regards to sort of kung fu was on television at the time and things like that. And so basically I was pretty aware that I wasn't going to get bitten by a radioactive spider or adopted by a travelling group of gorillas. So what really that left was martial arts. And so the idea was that I would be able to sort of overcome my fears and become this physical being that could take on all comers. I mean, that never really happened, as we know. Once we actually start on the journey, we see that the goals that we thought were attainable are actually just sort of pipe dreams and smoke and mirrors, and the real goals are much better.
Of course.
So that's kind of how I started. And then obviously Bruce Lee, like with a lot of other people, Bruce Lee sort of came onto the scene and really sort of just made a massive impact on so many people's lives, and that was it really. That was the main impetus. I just fell in love with it, and I fell in love with the idea of it, and desperately wanted to do it as a child. Okay,
so what was the first art that you actually studied then?
Well, I went into a number of different things. So I had a few false starts, and I did write about that in some of my books. But I went to a judo club when I was very young, and at the time, I was from a one-parent family. We really didn't have a great deal of money, and everything was a struggle. But my mum, bless her, decided that she was going to try and help me to achieve this. So I went to this judo club that was in a local leisure centre, and I can't remember who it was run by. I was a small child at the time. And basically, after a week or two, my mum managed to source a second-hand gi. Now, the gi had an orange belt, which obviously I wasn't.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't figure out how to keep the gi closed without the belt, so I ended up wearing it to the class.
Okay.
And then to my absolute sort of dismay and horror, the instructor singled me out as somebody that was disrespecting the arts by wearing a grade that I hadn't achieved, and made me take it off. And basically, I just felt terrible as a small child when that happened. And so I didn't go back, unfortunately, for quite some time. That sort of put me off a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because I mean, we do a lot of these podcasts, and we talk a lot just about how sort of the world has evolved when it comes to the martial arts, and the things that used to happen back in the days. Back in the sort of the 70s and the 80s. Obviously you just can't. Obviously those sort of things don't or shouldn't happen these days in terms of instructors' attitudes towards the students and stuff like that, where you can understand where they're coming from. Obviously the instructor hadn't really looked at the implications of what what they were saying, I suppose.
Oh yeah, he was right in the respect that I hadn't earned the grade, and that's true and proper. It just wasn't handled very well, and of course, when you're an insecure child looking for guidance, to have the sensei, the person that you're sort of looking up to, the person who is, the reason that you're in the room, to actually sort of berate you like that is quite sort of demoralising. So that sort of tripped me up for a little while.
Okay, so after that experience with judo, what was next for you? So presumably you had a bit of time out, and then did you try a different martial art, or did you go straight back to a different type to see if it was any different?
Yeah, well, during when you talk about people of a certain age, and you're talking about the sort of the 80s when the internet didn't exist, YouTube didn't exist, martial arts clubs on every street corner didn't exist, and not everybody was a professional fighter. This is a completely different world. And during that time, finding quality training was very, very difficult. Finding any training was difficult. So you just sort of fell into what you could find, didn't you, at the time? I think that's how a lot of people got started. So I had a little foray into sort of amateur boxing, and the same sort of thing with that. I did that for a little while and enjoyed the training, but found the mindset around the boxing quite difficult with regards to the competition side of it, where the kids were put together and there was a lot of shouting and screaming and baying for blood and things, and I didn't really like that side of things. Plus, nobody was kicking anybody, and I found that difficult. I wanted to learn to kick, so boxing at the time, I mean, it's a great skill, but it didn't really fit me at the time. So then, again, a little bit of a stumble for a while, and then I found this class that was doing ninjutsu. Again, if you remember the 80s, ninjas were all the rage, weren't they?
Everywhere, jumping out of trees and throwing stars and nunchucks and climbing. I had a pair of those climbing claws that you used to get out of the old martial arts shops. You remember them? Yeah. You used to get them on your hands and your feet, didn't you? I remember going to the golf club trying to climb trees. thinking I was a ninja.
The things we used to buy at the back of magazines.
Yeah, it's funny. I know I'm sort of digressing, but I remember my parents taking me to a martial arts shop in Coventry, and I think I must have only been sort of 13. I remember you could just go and buy like a ninja blow. What do they call the blowpipe things? Yeah, these huge big darts on. And it was just
right.
It's and obviously throwing stars, a whole selection of throwing stars you could buy, and it's just crazy when you think what you could just go and buy off the street, really.
Yeah, absolutely, totally, yeah. And it's interesting when you now look at the laws on weapons in this country, and if you look at the list of banned items and things, predominantly they're martial arts weapons. When the majority of users of those weapons would do themselves more damage trying to use them than they would the other person. It takes a lot of skill to use a lot of those weapons that are on the banned list, but it shows you the time frame when that was brought in as law, because, as you say, martial arts at the time was predominantly ninja related. So I went to this class that was teaching ninjutsu, and the guy there was a rather portly fellow, and he was showing what he classed as ninja running at the time. And can you remember that David Attenborough clip where you've got that lizard on the hot sand?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he kind of looked like that in his ninja suit. And so, again, that didn't really work out for me. I mean, I must admit, years later, I did come across a guy who said he studied in Japan for years and was the fourth dan in the system, and he actually had some really genuine skills. But this first view into it didn't really work out. So there were a few stumbles along the way during the 80s, and my Mr. Miyagi eluded me.
So judo, ninjutsu, what was next?
Well, that's where my luck actually swang in my favour then. So I happened to move to a new area and stumbled across a karate dojo, and that became my home for many, many years. The guys there were absolutely awesome. I had no idea of the level of ability and competence that I'd sort of fallen into. Again, like a lot of people, I just went somewhere that was close and available. And it turns out that these guys were actually, top tier instructors, and it was an absolutely fantastic foundation for everything that followed. So that was over in Bristol.
Okay.
It's actually quite interesting, isn't it? Because we have a lot of guests on each week, and the majority don't actually set off their martial arts journey going, I want to do kung fu, I want to do karate. They generally pick up into a martial arts school that's closest in their vicinity.
Yeah, well, I think that's down to age, to be honest. I think, for people that are my age, we had to really take what was an offer. And also, when you looked at the magazines of the time and the television programs of the time, it was all heavily sort of striking based, and there really wasn't a massive amount of choice back then, not really. You had a few staples, and obviously Bruce Lee came in, so Kung Fu took the floor, and then so you had that sort of what was in fashion, but there wasn't really that much about. Not like today, where literally every sort of half a mile there's a gym offering various classes in various disciplines. So the world was a different place, wasn't it?
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, so it just goes to show how much luck and fate there is really in the life that you lead, because in the day, I mean, it's the same for us. I mean, I started Taekwondo just because a Taekwondo club popped up 10 minutes around the corner from where my mum and dad lived, and luckily we had a great instructor, but that's not always the case, like you've said with your ninjutsu and stuff like that. You just don't necessarily know which club you're going to land yourself in, and if you get a good club and a good instructor and you fall in love with that art, it can be a lifelong journey, can't it?
Oh, absolutely, totally, yes. And I think a lot of people perhaps sometimes overemphasise the art in itself, and I do think if you can find a good, knowledgeable instructor with good skills, I think the actual discipline is secondary, if I was being totally truthful, because what you're learning is not just the physical, it's so much more, isn't it?
Yeah.
There is, yeah, and there's some great instructors out there, great martial artists out there who are great at a certain discipline, but they're just not very good instructors, or they find it difficult to teach. So you're absolutely right in what you're saying. It's not necessarily the art; it's the person that's the person. It's delivering the art. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you've got as you know yourself, there are guys that are physically very gifted and they're absolutely superb competitors, but because they never had to really understand how they got to where they got, they were just naturally talented at it. They find it very difficult to explain that to other people. And in the same vein, we've got guys who are superb instructors, but really weren't good competitors or things like that. But they're really good at translating the knowledge over to other people. And then obviously these days as well, if you're not a marketing black belt, well, you're going to struggle, aren't you? It's not so much martial as marketing these days a lot of the time.
Yeah, there's a huge element of that as well, most definitely.
So going on from so you studied various disciplines and stuff like that. Then Matt, so what took you through? I know obviously you've been a bodyguard and you've done close protection and stuff like that overseas and stuff like that. What sort of led you into that side of it?
Well, the close protection stuff and the bodyguarding stuff I did was UK based. I'm not stupid enough to take myself to a country where guns are prevalent and people use weapons from being small children. A week on a firing range is not going to make me proficient enough to deal with people in that environment. So I always stayed UK based where my skill set applied. Again, it's one of those where life is a funny thing, and it just kind of throws things in your way along, sometimes. And I just got asked one day if I wanted to work as a bouncer and take a shift as a nightclub doorman, because I was doing okay at the club and, I was winning some competitions and I'm not a small guy. And so it just seemed like a almost natural progression, really. Okay.
So talk us through, have you got any good stories from them days? I'm sure you have, working on the door.
Oh yeah, lots. Yeah, some I can talk about, some that will remain secrets forever. I've written. I did write a book about it, which to my delight sort of came #1 Amazon bestseller twice, which was really great. So I do talk about that in the book, and it's a very rich vein of conversation, because it's also very divisive when it comes to martial artists. And if we look at some interesting stories, then obviously you've got the sort of the violent side of it, but a lot more of it is about people and dealing with people and communication and seeing the vulnerability. And there's all kinds of really interesting stuff aside from the physical aspect that people sort of attach themselves to. So there was a young lady the one day, and she unfortunately had been messing around with some things we shouldn't, and had decided to indulge in some ketamine.
Oh, okay.
And
that's horse tranquilizer, isn't it?
That's right, yeah. It's not the nicest of drugs, but it's something that a lot of the kids are into these days. But it can have an effect of what they call a ketamine coma. Now, long story short, her friends came to me and said her friend was suffering. So we went to see, and she was basically unconscious and rigid and sort of dribbling from the mouth. Her eyes were open, but she was non-responsive. And anyway, we called an ambulance, and that took about 20 minutes, and they came, and it was all rather unpleasant. And then 2 weeks later, she came back, this young lady. She got out the car, and she came up and she thanked us. And she basically said that she was aware of every single thing that was happening. She could see it, she could hear it, but she couldn't respond.
It's like being trapped in your own body then.
Her body was completely rigid and couldn't move. Yeah, it was a spasm. So that was really interesting. And it's just things like that you don't normally see in your world, you know?
Yeah, it's funny when you're in these sort of in these jobs, isn't it? When you look at the public, and you know, you could, like you said, I should say you could write a book about it, but you have written a book about it.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's such a misinformed profession from people. So, you know, if I say to you as an example that there's a lot of security people that are claiming proficiency in martial arts because they've been a bouncer for a while, and there's an element of truth to that. However, there's also a massive difference between real violence in all its guises and being a door supervisor. That's just one element of the whole. And so just because, you know, you can handle drunks well doesn't mean that you can handle every violent confrontation that arises or every violent incident. You know, it doesn't make you an expert in domestic abuse, as an example, or ring sports or various other things. So there's lots of different elements to it. So it definitely helps, but it doesn't mean that you're the sort of the be-all and end-all. But then in the same vein, when you get sort of martial arts instructors that have never, ever had any actual real, you know, outside world sort of experience of confrontation, then that's quite difficult as well. And so I actually advise people to go and do it for a little while, not as a profession, but just to see that side of the world, if you like. It's certainly eye-opening.
Absolutely. I mean, how many years ago was it when you was working the doors then, Matt?
Well, I only stopped working on the doors a few years ago, so I did it for a very long time, and I now actively teach and train door supervisors and security people, bailiffs, close protection people, all kinds of stuff like that. So I'm still very much in and around the profession, although I don't actively work myself now.
Yeah. I was just interested to know, you know, your thoughts on obviously becoming a doorman or a bouncer these days, or a bodyguard these days, with all of the knife crime obviously that we get, and you know, the risks to being stabbed and stuff like that. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, like with everything else, any sort of frontline profession, whether that be police, emergency services, firefighters, ambulance staff, you know, even doctors doing house calls, things like that. The rise in violence is just astronomical, and knife crime especially. The problem that we have is the same across the board, is there's a huge amount of underfunding and a huge lack of actual proper training. You know, everybody's scared that they're going to become liable if they teach anybody anything that's even remotely useful. And so if you look at the SIA training, the door supervisors course, and the physical intervention involved with that, which I deliver, it's very good for the standard that it is, but the standard that it is very, very low. And so when it comes to actual sort of genuine physical violence, it stops long before then. And so you're not being trained to deal with this sort of thing. Now, I mean, as you guys know, the common sense approach is, you know, get the heck out of Dodge, isn't it? Don't be involved. If you can possibly get away from that particular scenario, then do so.
Of course.
But obviously, if your job is where you're paid to stay, then that makes things just a little more difficult.
Yeah. Do you think we'll ever get on top of this knife crime problem?
Well, for sake of being confrontational, it's difficult because, you know, some of the things I say sometimes are a bit divisive. But
you can be confrontational on here or divisive on here. That's fine.
Yeah, well, well, yeah. The thing is, you can only really say what you think, isn't it? And my personal view is that unfortunately, I do believe the situation is getting worse, and that's for a number of different reasons. I mean, society as a whole, I feel, is breaking down quite a lot. We live in a we want now generation, and everybody just wants what they want when they want it, and bugger everyone else. And that selfish attitude to life is creating a lot of problems. And then that's compounded with sort of underfunding in all kinds of youth projects, and there's no youth clubs anymore. There's very little help for a lot of the people with issues that could do with a bit of support. I mean, that's not to say the people that are in that field aren't doing their best, but there's a distinct lack of funding towards that. And then on top of that, you add the very real problem that these days violence isn't dealt with the way that it should be. We often see, everybody sees it. You read a newspaper and it's like, guy's just got a suspended sentence. It's his second offence, but he was very sorry, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, of course.
So I think maybe there should be a little bit more with regards to
deterrent.
Actual deterrent, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and I think our job as martial arts instructors is constantly evolving to take into account these sort of situations, isn't it? And because as you're right, society, especially the youngsters, it's almost like a world of instant gratification. They want it and they want it now. And I think there's a lot of parents that obviously now see that with their children, and that's why probably that there's been such a big spike in the amount of children that are being brought into martial art classes by parents, because they want to try and instill some of those old-fashioned disciplines and those old-fashioned values into their kids that they're not being taught in the schools or in society now.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I think that's where martial arts is at its absolute strongest and best. Forget cage fighting, forget being the hardest man in the room, forget all that silly ego-related nonsense. I mean, the fact that we have the power to make better people and give kids the confidence to grow into whatever they can actually be. I mean, that's an amazing gift that we have, and I mean that's our responsibility, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's it. We're not just black belts anymore. We're black belts, and we're mentors, and we're child psychologists, and we're everything, aren't we? Really, we have to try and be packaged up as all those different skill sets, really.
No, absolutely, yeah. I mean, the thing is, we're fighting the tide. We know that, but nonetheless, that's one of the best things about martial arts is the ability to just actually change somebody's life for the better.
Absolutely. So just moving on to your book then. So is it just one book you've got out, Matt, or have you written a couple?
No, I've got a couple out at the moment, with more on the way. I've decided that I like writing. It's something that I enjoy, and I sort of continue to do so. So I'm lucky in the sense that I have the time in my world to actually do that. So my first book was called Modern Samurai, a revealing look at the security industry, and that basically is a lot of sort of anecdotal stories and vignettes on my time on the doors. I was asked repeatedly, what's it like being a doorman, and a lot of people would have maybe wrong information on it, and so it just seemed that writing a book might be a good idea, and so that was the first one, which was fortunately well received, and I thoroughly enjoyed the process. So I then wrote another one called My Journey Up the Mountain, the Road to Black Belt, which is more about my sort of martial arts journey and things like that. I mean, both of them have been very well received, and I thoroughly enjoyed writing them both.
Okay, fantastic. Like I say, I've not. If I'm honest, I'm a bit of a rubbish reader. I tend to have to, myself and Jackson, we tend to stick to audio versions. But do you have it in audio, or is it something that's going to maybe come out?
The Modern Samurai version is on Audible, but unfortunately, for those that understand the Audible platform, there's you can either get somebody else to read it, or you can read it yourself. Now, if you read it yourself, there's obviously a lot of cost involved in that. And you have to buy all the equipment and understand how it all works and learn the IT behind all of that. If you book a studio, you've got to pay for all the time, the editing, so all that's very expensive. Or you can basically profit share and get somebody else to read it, which in this instance is the road that I took. And the problem with that is that the guy who read it did a really, really, really good job. However, the feedback that I've got is that it's not me, and
Yeah.
quite a few people have said that because it's such a personal story, they would have preferred it to be my voice narrating it.
Sure, yeah. It's difficult, isn't it? Because if it's a professional art, isn't it? Being a voiceover person.
Oh my goodness, yes, no, absolutely. There's like in everything else, there's a skill in it, and there's skill in it that everybody else doesn't see. And it's only when you try it yourself you realise, crikey, that's actually really hard. You just make it look easy.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, we hear a lot of that when we first started our podcasting. We were just two normal Joes that thought, it'd be a good idea to have a podcast that focuses on martial artists and gives other martial artists a platform to be heard on. We didn't consider the fact that we're going to have to start queuing up our interviewing techniques and our public speaking. So it was a bit of a challenge at first.
Yeah, so you've had to learn all the different platforms, how they all work, how to upload and everything. So there's a whole raft of things that you guys have had to learn.
Yeah.
No, most definitely. Well, from scratch, basically.
Yeah, but isn't that part of the fun, to be honest, though?
Yeah, well, the thing is, it totally puts you out your comfort zone, because, again, it was a brand new skill. And when you listen to our interviews now, compared to our interviews when we first started, I'd like to think there's been a slight improvement on, obviously, our interviewing technique and the sort of questions and stuff that we come out with and stuff like that. Because, again, it was absolutely nerve-wracking when we first started. And then sort of, 38 episodes in, it's starting to become a lot easier and a lot more natural, and you understand what you're doing. So the next step for us is to try and put ourselves out of our comfort zone again, by starting to do live interviews. That's the next thing with using the medium of Facebook and YouTube, and so basically try and get guests on and actually do live interviews, which will be the next step for us, which again will be probably thoroughly nerve-wracking,
but totally out of our comfort zone.
Yeah, and it's important to keep putting yourself in that position, isn't it? That's how you grow, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, great. That's such a good medium at the moment. This kind of podcasting space and everything. It's growing so rapidly, and also I think what a lot of people tend to forget is that we're instructors because first we were students and we like to learn.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw a good quote the other day, and I think it went something like, what's the difference between a master and a beginner, or an instructor and the beginner? And the bottom line was the instructor has failed more times than the beginner has tried, which is absolutely true. And it's
totally. Yeah. I mean, that's a very fair quote, isn't it?
Yeah, most definitely. It's both Gavin and I. We are. I like to think we try and keep ourselves as current as possible on learning methodologies and learning techniques, and try and keep an open mind on the self-development piece. So embracing failure is one of our key core areas where we look at where we've not done so well, whether it be on a podcast, and try to analyse and then improve it for the next time, and we try and keep that general theme everywhere we go in all parts of our life.
Well, absolutely. Well, that's how martial arts transitions across into life itself, isn't it? I mean, that's one of the things that's a thing that is instilled into the students as we go forward, is that you fail, and finally you get it right. But you've got to go through those failures to get there, and that translates into the world at large, doesn't it? As we're finding out.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, we've just had a guest on actually. Had a guest on just before you, and was just talking about. Like you say, schools these days where you get medals just for turning up, and you get this in the sports day. There's not a winner and a loser anymore. Everybody's a winner and stuff like that, and it's just it's just crazy because life isn't like that, is it?
It's setting false horizons because ultimately, I mean, we use a good analogy. If you go for a job interview, you don't all get the job. Only one person gets that job, and everyone else basically has failed ultimately, or they've not come first. So you've got to be able to prepare younger people in society for that. And I think, this all-inclusive, everyone's a winner attitude, whilst it's nice to be inclusive, there ultimately has to be one winner, and that's actually the part of a competition. And people need to be prepared for that. And if you can do that at an early age in subtle roles, then it makes it easier in life when you come across these larger disappointments. It's not going to be so devastating for you. And I think that's some of the challenges that we're having in today's society.
Totally agree. I think I think teaching people to fail, but giving them a safety net where there's no terrible consequence is much better than waiting for them to get into the real world where their decisions can really affect the rest of their lives. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I've got a little story that happened the other day which really highlights this. So I had a couple of guys join my club, young kids, so we're talking 5 years of age, and they went through the first grading cycle. Now, one of the kids couldn't make that grading cycle because the mum decided that they were going away for that weekend, even though it's done on 3-month block and they know and everything like that. And so 2 of the children did it out of the little group of 3 and the one didn't. Now, when they came back the following week, she then said that little Johnny should be able to now do the grading and should get his belt because his friends have got the belt. And I explained that it was a grading syllabus, it was done at a set time and you knew the dates and everything else, and it is a test, and the other guys did the test, and part of the grading, you know, is actually standing there in test circumstances and being able to perform what's asked of them. Anyway, all the time that I was doing this, little Johnny was crying and demanding that he had his next belt. And the mum turned to the child and was like, "Don't worry, I'm just sorting it out with him now. I'm sure he'll fix it for you," which obviously I'm not going to. Anyway, a week later, she's cancelled her subscription and taken her child out of my club altogether because I wouldn't give little Johnny his next belt for having a temper tantrum. So yeah, there's a little story of the modern age being a martial arts instructor.
Yeah, well, I think we've all seen stuff like that. You know, myself and Jackson have been instructors for a long time, and you know, I think these stories are getting more and more common, if unfortunately.
Oh, absolutely, yes, absolutely. But you know, how do you sort of deal with that in the modern age? I mean, do you set a precedent and say, well, actually, we'll do a little fake grading in class so that little Johnny can get his belt and then he's happy and I keep the student? Or do you draw a line in the sand and then slowly lose students out the bottom of the bucket because society's moved on?
Yeah, no, of course. So going forward, then, Matt, what's next for Matt? Then, you got any more books that you're currently writing, or you know, what's next for you?
Yeah, well, a number of really interesting things. Yes, I've got more books on the go, but outside of that, I am the CEO and co-founder of an organisation called Team Fight Back, which is really interesting. So that's an organisation that we've set up to help ex-veterans suffering with PTSD, mental health issues, things like that, through the medium of martial arts. And we're basically putting that together now. That's been going for a little while, but we've been pretty underground with it because we've been putting in all the structures and the background of that. So we're looking to actually push that out properly very soon now that we've got everything in place. It's a proper CIC, so it's a not-for-profit. So everything funding-wise, everything money we make goes back into that. And that's a really, really exciting project with some great people involved, and hopefully that's going to make a big difference to people. So that's one of the big things that's happening.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. I'm ex-military. So yeah, I'd like to understand a little bit more about that and potentially how we could support you, Matt, with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, fantastic. I mean, that's the idea with this, is that we're able to involve, you know, as many clubs as possible around the UK and maybe even global. We've had interest from America and various other places. So yeah, the idea is that we involve other clubs and we open up mat space, and we can get these guys and girls on the mats and benefiting from martial arts and the positive stuff that comes from that as soon as possible. So as you guys are aware, there's so many good things about martial arts training. You know, meeting new friends, having a community, staying fit, staying healthy. You know, it helps with depression and all kinds of great stuff. So it's definitely something that can be beneficial, and it's just managing to push that out now.
Fantastic. And your other venture is social media marketing, I understand, using the medium of TicTok. So I'm interested to know how that's going for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I, like a lot of other people, we all utilise social media for our clubs and our own sort of things going on, and TikTok kept popping up on my radar, and people like Gary Vaynerchuk and things like that have said, oh, it's something that people should look at. So a few months ago, I decided to do exactly that, and I sort of invested some proper time into it. I spent a lot of time researching it, and I did an awful lot of exploration of how the algorithms work, and researched a great deal into the platform, and basically have built a following of, as it stands this morning, about 136,000 followers. My top video is on, I think it's 2.8 million now. So my views are roughly between 1.5 and 1.8 million views a week. So it's a lot of exposure, and it costs me nothing but a little bit of time.
Wow, that's really interesting. I mean, we actually work closely with a media company up in Yorkshire, who obviously do a lot of stuff for our club. So it would be interesting to maybe have a bit of a longer chat about that offline.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, but when it comes to martial arts clubs or sports clubs as a whole, I did a thing a little while ago with one of my students, and this is where this is interesting for martial arts clubs. If you think about the old-fashioned way, where you walk down the street and you put a flyer through a letterbox, or you go to a school and you have that battle with the receptionist to try and get an appointment or somebody to listen to you, you've got to put work in, you've got to put effort in, you've got to put time in, and and sitting there at your desk, putting your leaflets in bunches of 35 so you can give to the classes, that sort of thing. It all takes time.
Sure.
And so essentially I made a 15-second clip with one of my students. That clip went viral. His entire school knew about it within 48 hours, not just the school, but the staff and the parents. And it just went absolutely all around the school. So I got complete and utter exposure for that entire area, for that entire school, for one 15-second clip with an ad spend of 0.
Wow. Okay, cool. Yeah, we definitely need to speak about that in depth a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on this morning. Before we go, we always ask our guests this final question: what would you advise a younger self now, given the information and the knowledge that you have of the world today?
Wow, it sounds very corny, but stick with the education, and that would be my number one thing. Something that I regret, because I wasn't a sit down at a desk kind of kid, and I found that kind of difficult, so I sort of disengaged from that, and also the old school way of learning was quite difficult. But over the years I've self-educated in many ways, and I see the value in education, and yeah, if there was something that I could pass on to not just my younger self but anybody, would be stick with the education. It really is critical, and it does make a huge difference into how your life goes.
Would you say sort of schooling education or more self-education? Because I know myself and Jackson, we're a big fans of sort of self-education through audio and things like that, and business books and stuff like that. But certainly, for me as a sort of 40-year-old, I didn't obviously do much self-education when I was younger, but obviously we're trying to do a lot more now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the world's, again, a different place, isn't it? I mean, we have the internet in front of us. We have the ability to access just about everything we could possibly want to know. And so the fact that there's audibles out there, the fact that there's podcasts out there, there's YouTube. So self-education is a great way to do that. And if you're not happy being constrained by a physical system such as the school education system, there's so many other ways to learn. That's the thing. There's really no excuse now not to learn, is there?
No, absolutely. Okay, Matt, listen, we'll have to wrap that up now. It's been really great having the chat to you today.
It's been a learning experience, actually. Yeah, really good.
Well, guys, thank you very much for inviting me on, and I've enjoyed it thoroughly. And when you do go live, give me a shout, mate. I'm happy to come on and talk some more.
Yeah, well, there's no reason, like I say, we'd always maybe get you on again. Are you going to the martial arts show in May?
Yes, I'm actually teaching at the UK Martial Arts Show, plus most of the other big ones around the country, so you can catch up with me there, absolutely.
Well, we've got a stall there, and we're doing a little bit on the main stage as well, so it'd be good to maybe catch up in real life and have a good chat.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, I look forward to that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your listening platform. It would be awesome if you could also leave us a review. We really appreciate your valued feedback.
Also, check out our website, themotivatedmartialartist.com. We also have a YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook page and Facebook group. All the links are available on the show notes below.
We'd like to thank again our show sponsors, skillsconnect.co.uk, the world's leading children's development programme for martial arts. If you're a martial arts school owner or instructor and are looking for some inspiration, ideas or drills for your children's classes, make sure you check the skills out.